Well, welcome everyone. I have a panel of experts with me today, and we're going to talk about some of the big questions that often come up as we're talking about online teaching. And so we're going to entertain those questions and give you some of our responses. First, I'd like to introduce the panel. So Lisa, if you would please introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Lisa Brown. I'm a program director at Gallatin College, and so I run online blended programs as well as teach in the programs, and I've been working for MSU for 18 years, primarily teaching instructors how to teach online.
Great, thank you. Jess?
Hi, I'm Jess Rowell. I am a 6th grade science teacher at Shady Grove Middle School in Montgomery County Public Schools here in Maryland. I have a unique background in that I have a tremendous amount of experience with online curriculum development. And of course, I'm a product of the hybrid approach from MSSE.
Great, thank you. And Jim?
Yeah, Jim Vanitas. I'm an online instructor for Montana State, the N10 program, as it was called 18 years ago. And I teach a conceptual physics class for elementary teachers on the science of sound.
That's great. Well, thank you very much, panel, for being here. So our first question is, what advice would you give someone who is developing and teaching an online course for the first time, or perhaps rethinking how to teach online? Jim, if you would respond.
Sure. Well, so my Science of Sound course is an entirely asynchronous experience, but it's scheduled and instructor-led. It's not self-paced. And I wanted it to be a fun and engaging experience for participants. It's based on, originally, 18 years ago, I was teaching an on-ground workshop for elementary teachers on the science of sound. And so I wanted it to reflect what I thought was a great type of experience on ground, and how could I recreate that online? Well, here's what I learned is, first of all, I had to kind of sort through what were all the big ideas, because there's a lot of content. So what's the main thing you want them to walk away with? But the second thing is, I focused not on content really. I focused first on the experience. You know, how do we create an experience that reflects my values as a teacher? And in my case, it was make it active learning, inquiry-based, hands-on, lots of reflection and lots of discussion, because that's where I believe my understanding of the learning science is, you learn not from reading things only, you learn from doing things and then talking about it. So I wanted my course to have that. So the experience design was really important. And then the other interesting thing I immediately ran into was rethinking my role, because anything that could be construed as a lecture now could be recorded. You know, so what do I do now? And it turns out what I do now is even more interesting, because it has to do with facilitating conversations and giving real feedback. And finally, then comes the content and the resources. In my case, I was fortunate enough to work with the N10 team, and they would help me put together and distribute a kit of stuff. And Lisa, you were the first one helping with that. So this kit of stuff becomes the core experience that they're sharing, because they have common things like slinkies and simple stuff to play with. And then we have a common place to start our discussions.
Okay. Jess?
Well, like you, Jim, it's all about the experience and what we want to make sure students walk away with. And most teachers, K-12, had maybe 48 hours to change their entire paradigm of teaching from in classroom to online. So fortunately, I had a background that helped. However, it was still literally teaching my students that I had only seen 24 hours prior in the actual classroom. So bringing that, what I felt strongly about for their experience into such a sudden change, it became very apparent that you can't take a myriad of miscellaneous material that things that you would just call materials management in the actual classroom is all of a sudden an implementation, be it synchronous or asynchronous or some mixture of both. And so I became very involved with trying to make all the materials make sense and be relevant, just like you're explaining, for students. So I do a lot of choice-based, synchronous, self-paced materials with a lot of self-empowerment that, okay, now I'm going to do this. Let's proceed to the next part of the lesson. And that, for lack of a better term, but that choose your own adventure style is just one method that we're using in science to make it engaging for students.
That's a really great idea. One of the things that I like to let people know the first time that they're teaching an online class is it's difficult, it's time consuming on the instructor's side, and it's not going to look like what you looked like doing a face-to-face class. And so it's a different paradigm, it's a mind shift, it's thinking differently about how you deliver content, as both Jim and Jess have talked about, and recognizing that creating an online culture is just as important as delivering the content. The students need to know that you're still a person and that they can connect to you. And once you've gotten that piece taken care of, you really can begin to deal more with the content. And I'll talk more about that later because I'm the instructor for the course. So, Lisa?
And just to leverage off of what everybody else said, I think the place I always begin and suggest teachers begin is that reflection piece that Jim mentioned, because you really have to reflect on your own style. You know, do you like to read the room as you're going through? Do you like to lecture? Do you like group works or projects? And if you don't know yourself how you like to teach, it's really hard to translate it into online. And then also, how do your students like to learn? Do they like watching videos? Do they hate watching videos? In my own classrooms, because I teach computers and accounting, they also have to do a lot of work. And so that impacts how I teach the courses. And then also, you have to start small. You don't have to do all of it all at once. Little steps are fine. You're constantly improving it each time you teach it. And each week you go through it, you make changes and modify it. So let's go on to the next question. So what teaching strategies from traditional face-to-face teaching also work well online, and what does not translate into online courses? John, do you want to start?
Sure. So I'm going to go back to, again, Lisa and Jim, I appreciate you both talked about that reflection piece. But again, I'm going to talk a little bit more about developing that online culture. And just like I do in a face-to-face course, one of the strategies I bring from face-to-face to online is getting to know my students. That's whether it's figuring out people's names or whatever it is. You'll see in online courses that I teach, one of the first things people do is post an introduction to themselves. I make sure that I am in the course, especially the first few days of the beginning of the class, and I'm responding as quickly as I can to those messages that people are posting their introductions. I try to find some way to connect with them. So for example, Jim has a picture of the beach, and I've been to the beach. And so I might say, I was in California one time, or whatever it happens to be. But finding ways to develop that online culture to me is really key. That's one of the techniques that I bring from face-to-face to online. And again, I'm not going to spend a lot of time answering my questions in this panel just because a lot of this you'll get through the course content. So I'll let the others chime in here now. So Lisa, I think it's back to you.
Yep, it is back to me. I really like discussions in an online course. I think the discussions can be so rich. It's much more than a face-to-face course because I'm actually a really shy person, so I would never be the one to raise my hand in class. But in discussions, especially because I can take my time, I feel I can thoughtfully propose a question. I like leading discussions, and I like the fact that in discussions, I can add more prompts, and so I can keep that discussion going and show that I'm present in a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really strong lectures online because I can do videos, I can bring things in and have a really rich lecture in short bites that the students can take and that they can do watch later, especially as I use captioning. My students love captioning where they can read it also. Things that don't translate as well, I can't read the class as well. So keeping in contact with them and making sure that I know how they're doing is a little bit more difficult. And because my classes have a lot of work, they have to do accounting projects, they have to do computer stuff. It's hard because sometimes it can seem very homework heavy. And so trying to make that so it doesn't seem like it's busy work is always a challenge. Jess, how about you?
Well, I really appreciate how y'all are bringing it from a perspective of people who have signed up for the course and they're ready to learn. They're showing up and they're ready. And in the case of K-12 having this overnight change, they're showing up because they're being told to. Hopefully they're being given a Chromebook. It's just such a quick active substitution. I think that this phenomenon of me being able to recognize a student's voice on Zoom without a camera right now is a temporary phenomenon. I think that's going to be very different for every K-12 teacher that's building these courses with some sort of hybrid classroom in mind for the future, be it if we see them in person or not, or some mixture thereof. So I have enjoyed the opportunity to work with a group of teachers, knowing that my students are seeing me and 6 other teachers throughout the day. They may not be seeing me in Zoom, but they are accountable for 7 different classes. So the K-12 experience is very different for a student right now, but I think we can use everything that we're learning of what's going well, like the connections, how much is too much connection, how much is too little, are we being equitable and accessible for all of our students, what else can we do to reach out to, okay, let's start the year a little bit more proactively with everything that we've learned.
Yeah, I agree. I think I want to first say one thing important, which may not be obvious. The emergency remote teaching you're referring to, Jess, is not what I'm talking about, right?
That is true. That's true.
And it's a very difficult thing, and I applaud every teacher who's taken a stab at doing anything to stay engaged with their teachers, their students. That's just awesome. But it's not what we're talking about. John, what your course is doing is giving people a chance to do it how they'd really like to do it. Right. And in my case, it took me 200 hours to create my course. So anyone who's feeling badly about not doing what they would like to do right now in this emergency should just pat themselves on the back and say, it's okay. Nobody could have done anything better than what you've already been trying. Right. So anyway, just wanted to say that. Let's see what works. What really works is discussions. I agree, Lisa. Discussions are just fantastic. You can ask probing questions and the discussions can go on for weeks. Literally, I've had really great discussions where people just keep thinking about stuff. And even the shy people, it's kind of more of a level playing field. Everyone can speak up. Everyone's just as loud. And to me, it's constructivism on steroids, these discussions. It's really great because in an asynchronous setting, you have time to think more deeply and ask more questions. Now, what doesn't work so well? Well, in an asynchronous online course, brainstorming is really slow. It's not nearly as fun. And humor, just forget it. Spontaneous humor just does not work. And in fact, you have to be careful what you write because what you think is funny may not be funny at all when you read it again. So spontaneity just doesn't exist. Don't expect it to exist. And use a lot of emoticons because, man, the tone gets lost. Okay, let's see. What's the next question here? When teaching online, how do you organize your course content to facilitate online learning? All right, Lisa, what do you do?
Well, I do organize my content by weeks, and I actually do that very deliberately. Each week I have a checklist of what the students have to do. It's everything from their readings, their discussions, their everything, every activity, every homework. And that's to make sure that they understand what they have to do. They don't have to stress about trying to find where the assignments are or anything else. Everything is linked out to make it as easy as possible. So they can come in. By then, hopefully, they know the technology, they can get started, and then we can spend our time working on the content. With the Intend program, we actually used to offer a module called Succeeding Online, where we trained them how to use the learning management tool, which is still important. Even in my face-to-face class, I have to spend that first week, like John said, not only getting the students meeting each other, but also making sure that all the students can deal with the technology. And so once I've got that part out of the way, then I can arrange my content weekly and I break it into small chunks. So it works for me to make it into a weekly type of thing. The other thing I do with arranging the content is I use the announcement a lot, because at the beginning of the week, I orient the students what we're going to be doing that week. I recap what we learned that week, so that I kind of get everybody on that same playing field and can make sure that I've got everybody ready to go into that weekly content.
Well, Lisa, not surprisingly, because you trained me, I do much of the same thing. I organize my content by week, and I also have a weekly checklist. The first year I didn't, and it was a mess. And I realized just how easy it is to get lost. I mean, what I thought was obvious was not. So I had to make it ultra obvious. I also use announcements. Every week I end with an announcement and begin the week with a new announcement, just to kind of make sure people know what's going on. Now, I leave content open. The old content remains open, but the new content is only open for the week you want to be working on now. Because in my course, it's asynchronous, but it's a cohort, it's a learning community, and it's not self-paced. So people say, can you release everything so I can zoom through? No, this is not a race to the finish line. We're actually learning together. So that's how I get things organized.
Right.
John, what about you?
Yeah, so one of the things that you're going to hear is a diversity of how people approach content and teaching online. For example, one of the things that I do is I build my entire course ahead of time, so I know what all the weeks of the course are going to we're going to look like. I also make all the weeks of the course available, unlike Jim. However, what I have found, even though the entire course is available and people sometimes look ahead, they generally don't work ahead because, like Jim, they stay together in a cohort, a learning group. But there are times with some online learners that they know they're going to be gone, so they can look ahead and anticipate their absence from the course and be more prepared. And I haven't had a problem with that at any level that I've ever taught. Another thing that I do to help organize my class is I have an extensive help page section. So I've anticipated the kinds of questions that I'm going to get, everything from writing to how you respond to a discussion post to, whatever it happens, how you turn an assignment in. And I encourage students to continually go back and take a look at that help page section. And the other thing that I always remind students to do, whether it's in my announcements or a general group email that I send out, is just, I always ask them to ask me questions. And I remind them that I can probably answer in 2 to 3 minutes a problem that they encounter online that would take them sometimes days to figure out on their own. So I don't mind them calling me. I can monitor my phone. I'm an adult. And I also find that having given out my phone number to students has not been a burden, and students don't abuse that. And they like the accessibility. Again, I want students to know who I am as the instructor, and so the more I can make myself available to them, I find is a benefit for all of us. Jess?
Well, I'm glad to hear I'm in the company of greatness here. So we did everything by week. I intend on changing that forever, even if I'm back in the regular situation, which I doubt. Doing things by week, giving students a number, giving them a roadmap of what each week will look like, even if we haven't built out the course yet. That has been the #1 lifesaver. And my hope is that our entire grade can use the same approach. So a student knows if they're a remote learner, that they're in week 4 for all of their subjects. And I found that to be the #1 biggest lifesaver. Like you, John, or Jim, both of you, I have a FAQ document, and it's a Google form, and they can see their responses in real time because I've shared also with them the exported response sheet in view only. So as they type a question, they see it pop up on the form and they can see me answering that. And then I just bring that up every single week so they see the log of questions. Oh,
hey, Jess, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So let's talk a little bit about what K-12 can look like for either elementary, middle, high school. What would those look like in online instruction where lessons are given on more of a daily basis? Jim, you're up.
The true answer is I don't know, because I teach teachers and I assume they're adults and they have a fair amount of executive function. I don't meter out things by day, I meter things out by week. And my course is more of a seminar-sized course. So everything I say is irrelevant, I think, to your question. But having said that, I think, there's always this thing about, no matter how you meter it, people are they delay, wait till the end, whatever. So I have to set really strong expectations that by Wednesday you should do this, and by Friday you should do that, and it's due on Sunday. You know, and I mean, so yeah, it's adult learners, but you know, you still have to have these mile markers in the week. Otherwise, well, these are busy professionals too, so you know, it's understandable. People are busy, and high school students are busy too. So the mile markers are really helpful. But I don't meter stuff out daily. I can't imagine that would work in my context.
Sure. But I think too, when you're working with elementary, middle school, and high school kids, even though you've blocked out the entire week as here's the content we're going to cover Monday through Friday, you can even chunk that down into here's what we're going to talk about on Monday. And you need to have that material at your ready and be prepared to have a conversation about that on Tuesday. Or I'm going to correct the assignment together either asynchronously or synchronously on Tuesday. So you're still going to help students chunk out the week, and you can still do that. You know, the big picture is a week at a time, but then you can net those out day by day. Another strategy that I've used with middle school students and high school students is a gamification type approach. And there are some gamification programs, and Jess will probably talk a little bit more to that, but you talked about the online options of things to do. So, you know, choose from column A, B, or C, but you have to choose one from each column. And that's another way to help students at those lower levels stay engaged, but also feel that they're doing something of value and still learning some content.
I would absolutely agree with that, John. I mean, I still remember that from your courses I took. That's probably the inspiration behind all of this. I definitely agree that there's so much that goes into what we can call the daily piece. I wouldn't argue that a daily synchronous interaction is appropriate at all grades, nor is it inappropriate. It's just that there's so many other factors going on in the K-12 environment, specifically middle school, that I think that it's most important for the entire team to decide on that kind of ratio of what they would expect and then proceed in some uniform motion. And I think that's what a lot of folks are figuring out. And there are misconceptions nationwide of what people want versus what they think they need. If they have their second grader on the daily Zoom with their second grade class, and then they see their sixth grader only needing to meet with their teachers twice a week as needed, in addition to their asynchronous learning, there's a lot of misconceptions. They think that the sixth grader's not getting enough, and that may or may not be developmentally appropriate. So I feel like there's a lot more education needed, just nationwide, of just kind of creating some of those brand new norms, and we get to be a part of that solution. So in that, I do see a really big opportunity for helping students with that advanced organization, that you are the learner, we're all part of this together, and we're all kind of learning together. So here is your course map. This is where we're going. These are the check-ins, etc. All of that advanced organization. And then I've seen a lot of students really surprise themselves as a result of that. They know that they're in charge of their learning.
That's really nice. Just, I mean, as a former elementary teacher, it's been real interesting going through this transition, and especially helping my daughter who teaches music in K1 and 2. And so if you want to talk about hard transition, that is a hard transition. And kind of the gems that I pulled out of that is all the things that you guys talked about, but also it's really hard to make sure that to keep the parents in mind. Also, even high school students, the parents are weighing in, as opposed to higher education that Jim and I teach, that, you know, they're self-directed adult learners. And, you know, I've really counseled my daughter to provide more resources to the parents and information to the parents, and that parent communication is almost just as important as the student learning communication. And she's had to provide more resources to the parents so that they felt comfortable doing it. But then she's also had to do a lot more justification of the value of the learning, as opposed to in the classroom, it's like, oh, you're the teacher and you don't have to feel like you have to justify what you're teaching every day. But in this new environment, you do a little bit more. So it's been really a learning experience for her. And again, the same things that we've talked about. And then, like you said, making sure that it doesn't come across as a correspondence course where they just log in and they just do it self-paced. But how to keep that community and that learning environment is really challenging. And it's one of the harder things that this transition has had to do. And so I go to the next question, sorry. So how do you prepare that online student with the study skills necessary to be a successful online learner? John, you want to start?
You bet. So I think that's going to vary depending upon the age and the developmental stage of the learner. But some of the general principles that will apply across the ages are to, as the instructor, you just need to be consistent in how you're giving directions to your students, what the expectations are, so that there's a pattern and a continuity and a consistency to what you're expecting students to do. One of the ways that I accomplish that in my courses is I put directions in multiple places throughout the course. One place buried in the bottom of syllabus is not enough because people are going to gloss over that and not find it. So don't feel badly about making those directions and statements multiple places throughout your course. Those also need to be clear instructions, and once you've established a pattern and the consistency to what goes on in your classes, be careful that you don't vary that. For example, I have a discussion rubric assignment every single week of the course, and some weeks, even at the end of our last semester course, just because of the pandemic, I thought, you know, I'm not going to expect that discussion rubric the last week, and I excused everybody from turning it in. I'll bet 75% of the students said, now we're supposed to turn in that discussion rubric, because they're dialed into that. That tells me that I've done a good job being consistent with my directions, but just because I altered it, it kind of threw everybody off a little bit. So I would say that that's how you help train people to be good learners in your classes, paying attention to that consistency piece.
I agree, John. I think that's really, really important. The other thing that I work hard with students is to convince them to check into the class often. That checking in, if my assignments are due Friday at Sunday at 5 o'clock, that they aren't checking in at 4:30 on Sunday. I mean, they have to check in multiple times, and I try to scaffold my assignments so that like if they have a big final project instead of a final exam, that I have due dates throughout the semester so that I know they're working on it. And so I'm kind of modeling how you don't procrastinate until the last minute to get things done. So that scaffolding of my assignments on my part, I think helps them be really good learners. Jess, what about you?
I really just need to chime in on both of what John and Lisa have said. I mean, the biggest piece I found is that we are partnerships with the parents at home, doing whatever we possibly can to help students. And that, yes, that's a response to now, but that's also just, I think, a lot of what we can expect in the future. Now that parents have seen more of an insight of what their children's lives are like at home, they have a lot more questions overall. So I see that anything that's promoting that advanced organization or empowerment or checking in often or clearly understanding the instructions, I think that goes both for the student and the supporter, whatever that home environment looks like. And I've had a lot of success with using only the terms must do and may do. I only use can when it's associated with like some effective domain. You will gain this amazing thing if you do this thing. And then I never use the word will because I have no control over what they will do. So I've had a lot of success making sure students understand that I will only use those two words. And as a PLC, as a full grade, we're really adopting that language. So it's very clear to the parent and the student what's required.
Must I go next? Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think, Jim, you're up.
Jim, you're up.
The spontaneous humor was actually pretty good.
Well, see, we're synchronous right now. So, you know, when you're synchronous, you can get away. So I agree with all of what's been said. The clear expectations are really important, and consistency. I think this whole idea of being present and being human helps a lot with these expectations too. And so that I start giving them specific feedback really early on about whether or not they're meeting these clear expectations about participation. Mm-hmm. And so later on in the course, it's not so challenging, but they are surprised how much I'm there. And even in an asynchronous course, they expect me to give them the content and disappear, and that doesn't happen. And they go, "Whoa, this person's really here, expecting things from me, and helping me." So I'm really helping them. Okay, so that's one piece: is clear expectations, and then it's scaffolded every week. So, like you, John, you mentioned a rubric for discussions. Actually, I do it in the form of a quiz. but it's actually an exit ticket for the week. You know, to what extent did I do this? To what extent did I do that? And then a little comment at the end of what was spectacular, or what kind of questions still are lingering to you this week. You know, and so that quiz, actually it is scored because their participation is part of their grade, but it's a really, what it is a weekly exit ticket and reflection. And then I also do that with their science notebooks. I ask them to turn in this week's entries into their science notebooks and then give them really specific feedback. So that becomes a reflection practice that's built into this. It helps them with their study skills. It really provides the scaffolding to do that. And Lisa, I love your suggestion of checking in daily. I tell you, even my adult learners haven't figured out that if you nibble daily, it's much easier than waiting to the end. And plus, I had to actually tell them sometimes, in individuals, I'll tell them, you know, you missed out on the discussion because these great things you said on Sunday when the week is over, we didn't get to react to it. So you know, next time maybe you could say those things on Wednesday or something. So it actually, you have to give them feedback. You know.
Good.
So let's see. The last question I have here is, how do you develop an online community? Student-to-student interaction, teacher-to-student interaction. How do you do it, Lisa?
Well, I always start with myself, of making sure that I'm approachable. And so, I mean, I share parts of my personal life with students, my hobbies, my puppies, how non-technology enabled my husband is, because I teach computer classes. I have a lot of humor. I'm a very open person with my students. They call me by my first name, provide a cafe area for my students to try to develop based off of their introductions, that they can extend that, you know, a place where they can be off topic in my class. They can talk about the weather or, you know, whatever might happen, that it's allowable. I also encourage students to work collaboratively. I work a lot with them on that. That's different from copying each other's work, but, you know, that we're all in this together. But it does take a lot of deliberate thought and concentration to do this and maintain it in a very authentic way.
That's great. Yeah, I found early on that I really had to pay attention to how I came across in the discussions. There was a book that I read early on. It's an old book called How to Facilitate Online Discussions, and it completely alerted me to my language, because what I thought was clear or what I thought was helpful may not have, well, it wasn't initially. So things like, you know, the discussion forums, I treat them as class discussions, okay, as distinct from personal one-on-one discussions. But you have to treat them that way. I had to learn how to respond differently. So if I said, Sally, that's a great post. Wow, what were you thinking when you know, now I'm talking to Sally. So instead, if I say, hey all, Sally just posted something really interesting. What are the rest of you finding? Do you agree, disagree? What is your evidence? You know, so open it up as opposed to close it down. The other thing I found in the discussions, and what happens is to get the community to really take charge and not me be the center of attention, is this matter of wait time. You know, in an online class, wait time is like, well, Mary Bud Rowe used to tell people, you know, teaching, you know, ask a question and let them raise hands, count to 10 silently and wait till more hands come up, you know, that whole thing. You know, because the average wait time in a face-to-face course is like 0.3 seconds or something, you know. So count to 10 at least. What I found in an asynchronous online course, the wait time, you know, the time before I come in and chime in again is like 2 or 3 days. And if I chime in too soon, it stops. The whole thing stops. So ask an interesting, probing question, and then just wait. Give people a couple of days to think about it, and then chime in again. So,
yep. Jess, how about you?
Well, I'm inventing as I go with my audience, but I have a strong initiative in our campus for achieving equity through like random calling and that kind of thing. So I've kept a lot of those existing strategies that they're already used to, both orally with my bells and visually with my pulling numbers out of a hat. So I was able to bring in like Flipgrids and other kind of mixed media to help them keep the patterns that they're used to. So the new favorite is an example. Granted, I haven't had to introduce myself online yet. That will likely be the case. So I'm learning from y'all. But in the cases of now, if I have, think of a question between 1 through 8, and they do that in the question, and then they see me do a flip grid of pulling that number from a hat, then those are the students that are going to get to do X, Y, and Z. Or those are the ones who are going to be paired up to do something else in a Zoom breakout, maybe as the synchronous part, but then there's some other asynchronous Google Doc that they're contributing to. So it's been fun keeping those elements of what they know that I have a high expectation for, that my job is not to teach them science, it's to teach them how to work together to learn science and to do so in any classroom. So I've enjoyed that challenge. I see a lot more creative strategies coming down the pike, hopefully.
Great. Well, thank you all for that input on that. A couple ways that I work to create online community are introductions at the beginning of the course, and all students look at those and respond to those. People who've been in my courses before have seen that I use a scavenger hunt strategy as well. So one of the first assignments is to work through the questions on the scavenger hunt, which moves people around in the course itself. So they're learning the course management system. They learn about where to post assignments, they figure out where the help pages are, et cetera, et cetera. I use a lot of podcasting as well in my courses. They're short little pieces, but students enjoy seeing their teachers. It's fine to send students out to Khan Academy or go look at Paul Anderson or something, but what students really want is you. And as uncomfortable as you are filming yourself, don't worry about that. Just get over it. Because in the classroom, face-to-face, they'd see you anyway. So they just want to know who you are. And again, as I mentioned, making myself available through email, through text messages, through whatever it happens to be, is another way to really develop that online community. And finally, depending upon the level of the student, I like to use facilitators to run the discussions. Jim talked about how he stays out of discussions for a period of time for wait time. And I like to use the students themselves to facilitate the conversation for the week. And I've trained them how to do that. That's part of that online study skill piece. But once students have figured out how they can facilitate their peers, high school kids can do that, middle school kids can do that. And it gives them ownership in the course and gives them some leadership skills that they might not have gotten someplace else. So those are some ways that we can help develop online community. Well,
I have a question about
go ahead, Jess.
That's what we get to learn in that course, because the facilitation is the next step. That's going to be fantastic for bringing in that student-to-student discourse.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's great. Well, panel, thank you very much. And we will, in the course, set up a way for you to reflect on and respond to our comments. And if you have any specific questions for any of the panel, just post those in the course where we have a place for you to do that. And we'll facilitate getting back to the expert panel and getting those questions answered. So again, panel, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, y'all.
Awesome.